Welcome, folks, to this week's edition of Tech Sales Advice. I am, of course, your host, Chris White, and this is the LinkedIn Live program for technical sales professionals and technical sales leaders. And folks, as I like to say, first, these conversations are live in case there's any, curiosity about that. Here it is. It's noon here in the Eastern time zone, the 2nd of April. We are not going to, the April Fool's Day jokes, that was yesterday. No April Fools today. And I like to remind people, these conversations, they are by design unscripted, unrehearsed, and unpredictable. And today's guest is, we've never met in person, and we've only chatted a couple times. She may very well be one of the most delightful people I have met in this profession. You cannot speak to her or listen to her without feeling good. I mean, just look at the smile on her face. She exudes positivity and enthusiasm. And I'm so excited to have this conversation. Her name is Hannah Thomas. She is a former educator and a senior sales engineer. She has just recently launched her own little consulting business called, as you might guess, Hannah Thomas Consulting. And the reason she's here today, frankly, is I caught the tail end of her Demo Fest talk, 2 or 3 months ago, something like that. Her talk was Stop the Scroll, Stories Remembered in a World Competing for Attention. What struck a chord with me is her focus on the customer and how she said, we need to focus on the customer. All right, that's enough of an introduction. Hannah, thank you so much for being here. Welcome. How are you doing today?
It is so good to be here, Chris. I'm excited. I think there's, a lot of wonderful things that you're doing. And I think anytime as professionals, we can kind of come together for honest conversations like this, it's really exciting. It's really beneficial. And so I'm just happy to be here and excited for the conversation.
Awesome. Well, I mean this in all sincerity. I enjoy speaking with you. I enjoyed listening to you. So I'm sincerely excited for today's conversation. And by the way, folks, for those of you who are out there, and we never know who's out there. So if you do happen to join us live and care to say hello, please feel free to do so. If you have any questions for Hannah, please, I invite you to fire away or just want to say hi. So Hannah, I want to dive into this idea of stories remembered in a world competing for attention. Before we get there, I'd love for you to just spend a minute and talk about your background. You made a point of saying you're an educator. And by the way, you're not the first former teacher, educator that I've had on this show. Do you mind just sharing a little bit of your background and how did you get into pre-sales?
Of course. I think teachers are incredible and could do probably any job. I think because teachers are so different, they, bring such a tenacity to get the job done that really kind of stands apart. For myself personally, I've been the type of person that I knew pretty early on who I was. When I was an early kid, I knew that I always wanted to help other people succeed. And I knew that probably would look different in the different ways that I was going to do that, practically speaking, in a job. So I did go to school to get my education in education, more specifically special education. I then went on to get a master's in applied behavior analysis. I wanted to understand why people do the things they do, so then I could help them be successful. If I understand kind of the driving motivators, really the aspects of behavior, I then taught. I'm here in the Nashville area, so I spent my teaching career here in the public school system and had such a wonderful experience. It's obviously incredibly challenging to be a teacher, and I taught in a special education classroom specifically, but I had the best experience, the best, coworkers that really supported me, the best families of my students. And so as I was looking to kind of transition into a new challenge, I'm someone that I love a new challenge. I kind of get this itch to try something that I know I'm going to be bad at and then work my way up trying to get better and better and better. And so that was where I transitioned into the software space. And so I started out as an early entry-level solutions engineer, had an incredible opportunity to really see a software company scale to a pretty significant degree. So the team size grew, our software set grew really significantly in the years that I was there. And I think in that, I saw the parallels through all of my experiences. My
Mm,
experience in education was different practically, but wasn't really different fundamentally than it was in the
mm,
sales setting. Even thinking about back in the days of when I was in school for behavior analysis, all of these pieces really flow together. So, kind of getting us to today, I was ready for a new challenge to kind of really help other SaaS companies be as successful as they can be. And especially having that experience of seeing a team size scale so significantly, I think I saw where in the industry there are gaps in the ways that we can really lift each other up. I
mm,
think oftentimes we feel like we're competing with other software companies. And I really think that that's not the position we need to be in. I think we need to look at how can we really help our prospects best, and that's going to translate so well to our customers. And so I'm excited to now be on this new adventure. And again, like I said, I love a new challenge. So anytime I can kind of be in a position where I've got to figure out something new, so I'm excited for that.
So backstage a moment ago, you told me that you were running a half marathon. Does that fall into the challenge category? Have you ever
That
done that before?
definitely falls. Okay, so I've done it twice before. I have not done it since giving birth last year. So I feel like, things are different once you have a child.
Oh
I
yeah.
also will say, when you tell people you're running a half marathon, I think people expect that you're a good runner. And I am a really bad runner. Like, I am so slow. It takes me so long to run. But I think the thing is, I like to be okay being bad at something. Like, I'm
Mm,
not good at running, but I am going to do a half marathon. And so there's some sense of excitement that comes with that. And I think, again, it's similar to what we'll talk about when it comes to selling software, is that it's not a competition. We're all in this together. I really believe that we all
mm,
rise by lifting each other up. And so I think that definitely flows from my professional life to personal life. And if anyone is also running in the Nashville Half Marathon, you'll probably see me at the end, at the very last, but I'm going to have a smile on my face. That's for sure.
awesome. So, and that you said that's Nashville. That's the Nashville
Mhm,
half marathon. Okay,
mhm.
awesome. So there's a couple things that you said that I just want to double click on just for a minute,
Yeah.
because honestly, part of what you talked about almost, and look, everybody who enters this profession tends to come from a different background and is a very unique mix of strengths and characteristics. But there's a few things that you said that really stood out to me. First of all, you used the word tenacity, that teachers, and look, I have a twin sister. She's been a teacher for years. I understand what it takes. Actually, you mentioned special education. I dated a girl in college who was a special education major. So I certainly understand some of that. And you're right, there is a certain tenacity that it takes.
Mhm,
You mentioned, and we just touched on this idea of challenge. You'd like
mhm.
to challenge yourself. I think SE, we like the challenge. I mean, that's
Yes.
something we rise up to we rise to the occasion, right?
Mhm,
Um, you mentioned lifting each other up
mhm,
and thinking less in terms of competing and more in terms of focusing on helping the customer.
mhm.
Let's dial into that. And by the way,
Yeah.
somebody, it looks like somebody on the YouTube. So we're broadcasting both to LinkedIn and to YouTube. And it
Uh-huh.
looks like someone on YouTube said, "May I ask a question?" So the answer is, of course, yes. If you care to ask a question, please do so. So I want to dial into this a little bit further.
Mhm,
When you say let's not think about an engagement with a client or a
mhm,
potential prospect from a competitive lens, can
mhm.
I trouble you to elaborate on that a little bit?
I think this kind of goes back to fundamentals of behavior that we can see across our lives, but even more practically as SEs when we think about, a competitive situation. This might be where you're going head to head and you're not sure how it's going to go because you're nervous and you're stressed. Am I going to be able to present well? Are we going to beat out the competitor? And I think that when we're sitting in that place, that drives a lot of nerves, which is not
Mm,
always going to be best. I think we have to kind of walk this line of it's good to have a challenge. It's good to know where our shortcomings are, but nervousness can lead to then not performing our best. And so when I'm in those situations, and what I encourage others that are in those really competitive head to head situations is don't think about yourself, honestly, and don't think about your presentation as much as be so focused on what the prospect actually needs and what the best experience for them is going to be, and then do everything within the realm of your role to meet that. So provide a demo experience, provide a presentation, provide a detailed RFP, whatever it might be, for the sole purpose of helping them be the most successful as they can be, which I'm sure is your product and is your thing that you're trying to sell. But I think it shifts from the perspective of how can I look my best versus how can they be their best? Even thinking about today, obviously, Chris, you make this so easy for your guests, but I was not nervous at all because I'm like, I'm not thinking about me. I'm thinking about the people that are listening, the people that are watching. I hope they get something valuable about it. So I think it really plays into a lot of areas of our lives, professionally speaking, as we're delivering these things. When our focus is on helping them be the most successful they can be, it removes this pressure of competitive, head-to-head, difficult, which can lead to not always our best work.
I work with lots of sales teams. In fact, over the past 6 years, I've worked, and I've lost count, but I've worked with literally over 100 different software organizations and literally thousands of SEs and AEs. And what you just said, which is don't make it, in essence, don't make it about you. Mm-hmm. Don't think about yourself and what you, and make it about them. Focus on the customer. And it does. It almost magically takes the pressure off of ourselves. Mm-hmm. There are so many people that either they don't understand that. None of us default to that. So where did you gain that perspective? Mm-hmm. That is such a mature way to look at life. Mm-hmm. It's such a mature way to look at our profession. What do you attribute that to you for yourself?
That's a good point. I will say definitely my experience teaching is, a big piece, especially working with people with disabilities. It's really about serving other people and helping them be successful. And I think I saw the comparison of the joy that I feel when I help someone be their best selves versus the momentary happiness of like an ego boost. Like, I did it, I won, I'm the best. That's not very lasting. That doesn't hit the same way as really making someone else successful. And I think as an SE, we both get a lot of the spotlight, but we also don't at the end of the day. I think oftentimes I was often introduced as, and now here's the star of the show, Hannah. And I didn't really want to be introduced that way because, it builds the expectations, but then you're not in the same role as an AE is. And so while you both can get a lot of the limelight, you don't really to also some degree. And so I think that because of that, I can see other peers in the space that are trying to maintain this status that we're almost given of you're the star of the show. You need to do the best presentation, the best demo to win this deal. And that is not going to be the best place for you emotionally. And again, the lasting effect of my prospect got what they needed and they're going to be successful. So I can go and enjoy a wonderful weekend versus I did my best, I'm the best, I should get a raise, all the above. That doesn't hit the same way. And I think that it's something where we need to humanize this again. There's a lot of competing components in tech right now. We've got ways where people are fearful of their jobs being replaced, reduction in team sizes, AI replacing your role. And so it's like, you got to lean into the things that are your strengths, the human aspects where you can, really bring that emotional intelligence that we see not being replaced by any type of technology.
It's amazing how much you and I think alike. And there's so many thoughts firing for me as you're sharing in no particular order. Something that I've been saying for a while is automate where and what you can, elevate where you cannot. And that's really what you're talking about is we need to elevate in the truly human skills, the truly human intelligence. And you use emotional intelligence. In fact, the term that I like to use is emotional maturity.
Mhm.
So it's one thing to have emotional intelligence. It's another thing to actually apply
Yeah.
that emotional intelligence. Another thing you said, and this is something, and I mentioned this to you backstage, I work with an organization called Aslan Training and Development, and we run programs based on a philosophy that we call other-centered selling.
Mm.
And I shared this with you, Hannah, and for our guests out there, the best way to think of other-centered selling is it's the opposite of self-centered selling.
Mhm.
And sometimes when people hear that, they think, well, are you calling us selfish? Are you telling me I'm self-centered? And my response is not necessarily, but we all, as we like to say, we all default to self.
Mhm.
By the way, Hannah, I usually prove it when I do a workshop. I will literally take a photo of the entire group, and then I'll ask them if they want to see the photo. Of course, they want to see it, and I'll show them the photo. And then about a half an hour later, we're talking about this idea of other-centered versus self-centered. And I say,
Mhm.
I showed you a photo of the group a half an hour ago. Whose picture did you look for first? What do you suppose
Exactly.
everybody is thinking to themselves?
Yeah, that's a great point.
Myself, right?
Yeah.
We default to self. And
Mhm.
so what you're talking about really is that idea is that, and look, I'm the first to admit it, this was a big growth point for me early in my career as an SE. I had to come to peace with it's not about me,
Yeah.
right? It's really about the customer. The
Mhm.
final thing that I'll say before I come up for air is another one of our favorite sayings in this other, and this is precisely what you just said a moment ago. We are most fulfilled when serving other people,
Mhm.
period. So
Totally.
if we think about our role as serving other and having the opportunity to
Mhm.
serve other people, it completely and totally changes the game.
Yeah.
Now, let me turn the tables just a little bit.
Mhm.
Some people may be hearing this right now, and or somebody might, some folks might catch a recording and think, well, I mean, this other centered thing, it's fine, and yeah, like think about, but I'm under a lot of pressure
Yeah.
from my account executive, like they want to get the sale,
Mhm.
we've got to hit a number. So how have you either for yourself sort of balanced this competitive nature versus your internal compass of doing right by the customer?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that you kind of touch on this assumption that comes into when you hear things like other-centered selling is people think that that means just let the customer talk the whole time and just ask them questions and let them speak. And I think that's where we can have this gap in I want to do that. I want to focus on them, but they need to know about the software that I'm selling. Like they need to understand it. And so I think it comes into play that yes, we should have an engaging conversation. Yes, we should ask them questions, but this doesn't take away from SEs providing a detailed demo experience, a detailed presentation. This doesn't take away from that, but I think it really plays into the practical way that we actually talk about software. How are we describing the features? Are we describing it as here's the exact feature functionality, and I'm just going to drill all the amazing things that it is? Or are you going to describe it in the way that it brings them value? Again, focusing on them doesn't just mean let them speak the whole time. And so, even thinking about, I think that feature functionality piece can make the biggest difference. I often refer to a couple of different examples, but Excel, I think that's something that's just really boring to me. I hate to say it's really valuable, but it doesn't have a lot of flair. And so if someone was providing a demo experience on all of the features that Excel offers, no one's engaged in it. Just describing here are the exact ways that pivot tables, summarize, analyze, explore data sets. That's just going to put somebody to sleep, and that's not going to make the sale happen. But if you describe it in the way that the pivot tables turn overwhelming spreadsheets into instant insights, you can make smarter data-backed decisions quicker. That is still describing the feature functionality, but you're now putting it in the lens of the value that they actually get about it. When I was first starting, a lot of our onboarding and learning was don't ever describe a feature, go through a whole demo presentation and not describe the value of a feature. Every time you speak about something, what is someone benefiting from that? And so I think that's the piece where you could assume, I want to focus on other people. That sounds great. It sounds awesome to be fulfilled, but how do I actually do that? And I think it plays into the ways that we talk about our features in the
Yeah.
software.
Yeah. As I like to say, the so what behind
Mhm.
the feature, right? And
Exactly.
another thought that came to mind as you were sharing, and you mentioned that being other centered or making the
Mhm.
customer the priority, as we like to say, doesn't necessarily mean let them do all the talking.
Mhm.
It doesn't necessarily mean letting them drive the boat or drive the
Mhm.
ship. And in fact, oftentimes customers don't know what's in their best interest.
Yeah.
And so, and here's the truth. For starters, we sell for a living, they don't buy for a living.
Mhm.
Right? So we need to show some leadership and some guidance there. Number one. Number two, we work with countless individuals in similar roles with similar organizations, and
Mhm.
we likely have seen things that maybe they haven't seen.
Yeah.
So that is our opportunity to step in and show some leadership. And I think that's what you're driving at. By the way, whoever made a comment on LinkedIn, it just says LinkedIn user. So we don't know who that was. But he said, I totally agree to this, Hannah. I always ground myself as, quote, the guy who's helped other customers with this kind of problem. And I
Wow.
always like having my sales folks know that's how I'm introduced. So love that. If you
Love
care to
that.
let us know who you are, would love that as well. And by the way, if there's any other folks that care to share an observation or ask Hannah a question, please feel free to do so. Hannah, I want to double back on something. Another
Mhm.
thing that you mentioned to me that I thought was a really good analogy. You were talking about social media and
Mhm.
the fact that the people who are most engaging, most interesting, and the videos, for example, that
Mhm.
catch our attention the most, they're not the people who make videos of themselves. Look at me, I'm so great. They're the
Mhm.
people that create videos in a slightly different context. Do you
Mhm.
mind sharing that perspective again?
Yeah, exactly. This kind of is a fundamental of literacy. So it plays into, physical literacy of books, but also when we think about media literacy, really engaging stories provide two things. They provide a mirror for you to see a
Mhm.
reflection of yourself, and
Mhm.
they also provide a window to be able to see into a completely different experience. And I think if y'all think about it in that context, think about the things that you accidentally fall into that you're like, I've been scrolling for hours because I saw someone living a very similar experience to me, or the inverse of, I saw a completely different experience and I was so curious to see what that was like. And I think that is where, again, when we provide, maybe videos, things that are asynchronous and also in-person digital communication, if we're just saying, hey, look at me, come look at all of my amazing things, that's not going to stop somebody's attention. That's not going to get them to have what they need. I think when we make sure that the point of the conversation is, hey, come see what your experience is right now and what it could be. And I think that's where, of course, we need things like meaningful discovery to understand what are their actual pain points so I can show them that window into a different reality, but also affirm where they're at right now. And so really thinking about that, mirrors and windows, how can you give them that mirror to feel validated in what they're currently in, and then a window to how their lives could be so much better with the software. I love what the LinkedIn person commented of, he's the kind of guy who's helped someone with a problem like this before. That brings a lot of credibility and a lot of safety for the prospect to feel like, oh, so they get my problems. They understand it. And they have someone who's done this before. That is a great way to be able to provide that window and mirror for someone in a really meaningful way.
I believe that, and this is something we talk about in all the workshops we run. People want to feel heard, understood, and
Mhm.
validated. In fact, I tell people everyone wants to feel uniquely
Yeah.
heard, understood, and validated. And I tell people, I bet I can prove it. Have you ever heard a prospect or a customer say, our situation is a little bit unique? Our situation is a little bit different, right? Have you ever not heard a customer
every
say,
time?
right? And by the way, they're 100% right. Even
Yeah.
though you may have seen it 100 times, their
Exactly.
situation is a little bit unique. And I love simplicity. If anybody
Mhm.
who is familiar with the 6 habits knows, I love simplicity. The simplicity of the mirror and the
Mhm.
window is so powerful. This
Mhm.
idea of let me first put up a mirror and reflect what I'm hearing, reflect what I think I'm seeing, and potentially reflect either not just where you are, but maybe where you might go or where you might
Mhm.
be headed if things don't change. And then let me stand up a window that gives you a view into
Mhm.
a possible different outcome or a
Mhm.
possible new destination. Those two analogies are so powerful. That's gonna stick with me for a while. I want to take us in a slightly different direction.
Mhm.
The things that we're talking about here,
Mhm.
being all about the customer,
Mhm.
not so focused on yourself, worrying less about beating the competition and more about helping the customer make the right decision in ideally in your favor, but even if it's
Mhm.
not in your favor, if I didn't know better, or if anybody were maybe just listening to this conversation, they might think, I mean, this just seems to come natural to her. Like
Mhm.
this just seems easy for her.
Mhm.
Has it always been easy, or have there been a few lessons that you've learned
Yeah.
along the way that have helped shape this perspective?
That is a great point, and it's a great question to bring up because I think I really don't want people to think that it is easy. I do feel very, very comfortable in these practices now. And especially in my experience, I feel very, very comfortable in competitive situations, but not because it always felt that way. Like there were, I'm sure probably my first whole year of being an SE, I was sweating it before every single meeting. I was nervous. I was running through my notes constantly. I was doing practice runs over and over and over and over and over again. And I think there was some sense of that was the journey of releasing the perception on myself. But I
Hmm.
also think it's something that I've touched on about my personal life is I think I'm okay with things being hard that are good. So, having a big presentation that's a lot of money is on the line, I need to be very prepared. That's actually a really good thing because there's a lot of benefits that can come out of that. And I think I don't want to be in pursuit of easy. I want to be okay that things are hard because things will be hard in our lives professionally, personally, all the above. And so I want to have almost this comfortability with hard things. So
Hmm.
while these things aren't always easy to do, I think we shouldn't be on a pursuit of easy. We should be comfortable in the hard things. It's kind of the same thing with a half marathon. I don't think anybody is saying that that is an easy thing to do, but it's a hard thing that's really good. And so the things that we do, they're really worthwhile, but they are hard. Being an SE is a very hard role to be in. You have to be making micro decisions constantly. You have to hold a large bank of technical features that are very nuanced and complex. And so I think almost equipping that, like, yeah, that is hard and that is really good too. And so being able to kind of hold those things, there were many a days where I was very nervous, my voice was shaky. To be honest, my very first demo presentation that I did, I hate to say the feedback I got, you guys don't want to know it, it's that it felt like a little bit of a freight train because I was so nervous. I was talking so fast, a million miles an hour. So I'm definitely practicing my cadence, going slow, leaving room for someone to respond. So while this is something I'm comfortable in now, I was definitely not always comfortable doing it.
I think most of us, if we're fully honest, have quite a few demos that we'd like to have back.
Yeah.
Certainly earlier in our career. I know
Mhm.
even in the book, I wrote about an experience where the leader and I ended up in an elevator together, just the two of us. And I said, so what did you think of my presentation? And he finally turns to me and says, I don't think anybody in that room had any idea what you were talking about.
Oh, no.
And had he turned to me and poured his bottled water on my head, that would not have surprised me more than the words that came, because I thought I had done brilliant. So yeah, I think we've all been there.
Mm-hmm.
When you were making the transition from educator, and when you make the transition from educator to software, was your first role sales engineer? Was that the first role that you stepped
That was my very first role.
And when you stepped into the role, did you know what you were getting yourself into?
Oh, not at all.
So talk a little, because a lot of people that I've had on this show said, honestly, somebody reached out to me and said, hey, I think you'd be a great sales engineer. And they respond with, what's a sales engineer? And then they took a shot into. So I guess I'm curious to unpack a little bit more. How did you make that transition? First part of the question. And then second, a bigger part of the question, were there fears or concerns making that transition? And if so, what were they?
That's a good question. So the practical process of me going from a teacher to a sales engineer was, the jobs that I applied for were literally just software that I had used in the classroom. And so that very first role was a software that I had used as a teacher. I saw the benefit directly as a user. Teachers aren't typically the buyers of the software. And so it was definitely a different experience. But I think I saw really that driving motivator to the mission of the company, which I think is whether you're a teacher or not, making a career decision about the mission of the company can be really impactful for your work experience, because I believe that we can do a lot of different things. Maybe your specialty is marketing, maybe your specialty is sales, whatever it is. If you're working for a company that you really believe and back the mission, you can kind of make anything work. And so while I didn't know a lot about what an SE was, what it looked like, I definitely had a lot of the leadership see the capacity in me and the connection that I had to the mission. And I also think they knew that the skills that I didn't have were teachable skills. And so even as people might feel nervous, they might feel underprepared, know that you kind of can learn a lot of different skills to get you where you want to go. So even if you don't have the experience, if you don't have all the exact right things, you can learn them. There's not a lot of gatekeeping in this industry. I think it can feel like that because it may not be explicitly said, which is why I think your book and all the things that you're doing really kind of demystify this industry and kind of paint it in a clearer picture. And so when I made that leap, I definitely was fearful for speaking in rooms that I wasn't as familiar with, speaking with boards of education. This software company now is selling to businesses where it's really scaled pretty significantly. And so I think my fears were, am I going to come in and they're going to be like, oh, here's Hannah. She was a little school teacher and she's now going to, I wanted to have some credibility in the room of, I have something to offer for you. Yeah. Now that took a gradual learning curve of, again, the cadence in which I'm speaking, the vocabulary that I'm using, all of those things were really a part of the learning curve of translating from speaking to very young children with complex communication needs to speaking to Fortune 500 companies. And I'm speaking to their C-suite about why they should purchase the software. And so I think that it's important for people to know that you can change, you can grow in that. Again, I was a freight train that very first demo, and now I would like to hope that it's not as much of a freight train experience, but that those fears and limitations that you may hold for yourself aren't necessarily true, that you can grow and you can learn in those things.
I'm reasonably certain you've passed the freight train phase. There's a couple things that come to mind for me. or came to mind to me as you were speaking. First of all, I just want to make sure it's clear to me. So when you were applying for a job, did you know you were applying for a sales engineer job? And did you have a pretty good idea of what that was?
Not really. I think that how I explained it to other people was it's in sales, but it's kind of also in marketing, but it's kind of also in product, and it's kind of this, it's kind of that.
Okay.
Because SEs really do, while they're primarily in sales, you work pretty close with product to have to
Without a doubt.
know the feature set and marketing for the value. And so I really didn't have a firm understanding. I just knew they're going to pay me to talk. And that sounds great. So
that was your perception. They're going to pay me to talk about this product that I've been using myself as a teacher, and I'm familiar with it, and I'm passionate about it. And that sounds awesome. So let me jump in. And the fears associated with that were entering the unfamiliar rooms, the school board meetings, et cetera. Something that you said, and I even wrote these words down. You mentioned the mission. If you believe in the mission, it sounds like that was a big driver for you, that you believed in the mission of the organization, which, and obviously I don't know the software really at all, but my guess is the mission was to help enable teachers in the classroom be more effective, be more efficient. And I don't know if you read the book called Drive by Daniel Pink.
I don't think so. No.
So if you haven't, you just sort of getting to know you a little bit, I think you would love the book. But he talks about the 3 intrinsic drivers behind our not just our profession and our career, but really our life's work. And the 3 drivers, and for me, these are really true of being an SE. The first is mastery. We seek work and vocation that gives us a chance to develop mastery. The second is kind of interesting. The second is autonomy. And I feel like being a sales engineer, it's interesting because I've talked to some SEs and they're like, well, I don't feel like I have that much autonomy. And I'm like, okay, well, do people tell you exactly what to do day in and day out? Well, no. Well, we have a great deal of autonomy. But the third and the biggest is purpose. And so I think to your point, if we develop mastery in an industry or in a technology or something of that nature, as an SE, I believe we certainly have a certain amount of autonomy. And then if we are also aligned with a company's mission and can find purpose, that's sort of like the perfect triangle, right? So in any event, those words resonate with me a great deal. Hannah, let me just push pause just for a moment. We're going to wrap. We'll probably go another 5 or 10 minutes here, folks. I'm speaking with Hannah Thomas, former educator, senior sales engineer. She's just recently launched her own consulting company called Hannah Thomas Consulting. She's doing pre-sales consulting. If you can't guess or haven't guessed already, she's just a ball of energy. She's got a great attitude, a great outlook on life and the profession. Hannah, as we wrap things up, if you were to speak to, let's just say, someone in the education field or maybe some other field, and they're thinking about this idea of getting into the pre-sales, the sales engineer role, is there any advice that you might give them, maybe that we haven't touched on, or anything that you might recommend, or piece of advice that is beyond what we've already talked about today?
That's a great point, especially thinking about, the possibilities of listeners that could be watching live or asynchronously watching the recording. I think my biggest recommendation is kind of the piece that I touched on, that just because it's hard doesn't mean it's bad. And almost this, feel comfortable doing something you're bad at. and be okay with being bad at it. But I also think if somebody is watching this and they're thinking, I really want to move into this space, I want to be an SE, I want to try this type of role, and it feels like there's so many barriers because of maybe lack of experience, lack of knowledge, I think know that there are a lot of really incredible tools. I think your book is one of them to really help kind of enter into the environment, understanding effective ways to do so. And also that, just because you don't have experience doesn't mean that you don't have what it takes to be successful. That entry level role that I started in, I actually didn't have the number of years of experience that they were requiring. And because in the interview process, in those early engagements, I really leaned into those human aspects, and I really kind of drove home the mission that I wanted them to be successful. And that was going to be my driving motivator. And so again, if you're feeling this pressure of technology is moving so quickly, I don't know if I can keep up. Is there still space for me? Am I getting pushed out because of technology? Know that there's always space. There's always space for people and the skills that you bring. Just because I have strengths that I've been able to grow in doesn't mean that you need to be exactly like me or exactly like Chris. Lean into the strengths that you intrinsically have and be okay being bad at them for the purpose of being good at them and comfortable in doing so.
Such powerful words. Again, just reflecting on a few things you said, and I've had other people on this show talk about some of the things you talked about and say this, and it's worth repeating. This is my interpretation. Be comfortable with the uncomfortable is really what you're saying.
Yeah.
Another thing that you mentioned that triggered a thought for me is you're right. You didn't necessarily have experience as a sales engineer, but you were an expert in the education field. You had a great deal, and I've told countless people, look at the experience and the expertise that you do have and target software companies that serve those roles and those professions, because you actually walk in with instant credibility as you were able to do yourself.
Exactly. And I think I'll say that is kind of the role of the SE, of taking features and translating that into their language. And so if you maybe don't have on paper the exact things that they need, can you translate it to how it'll bring them value, what you already do have? And that will show the experience that you do have to be an SE if that's what you're really seeking after. So it's like that skill of being able to effectively communicate something that maybe when it's black and white, it doesn't match up, but you really communicate that underlying value. That's going to really set you apart in a way that really might be the thing that makes the difference.
As you were speaking, I think the other thing that just comes through is if you are sincerely motivated to help other people, that comes through. As we like to say, motive is transparent. And if you even said it, one of the first things you said, I recognized in myself at a very early age that I wanted to help others succeed. And that really is the thread that you have pulled through your career based on all the things you've shared. And that's what you bring to this role. And I just believe that those people who do that, they're gonna succeed. That doesn't mean you're gonna close every deal.
Exactly.
Right? But it does mean that you have a leg up because people aren't questioning your motives. It's in fact quite the contrary, quite the opposite. So, Hannah, this has been a delight to have you on the show. I do want to give you, we've got a few more minutes. I do want to give you a chance. Do you mind sharing a little bit about how are you helping clients or what maybe challenges or problems might an organization have where you might be able to step in and help them?
Yeah. So I really partner with SaaS companies helping to scale an SE team, whether that is a small team and wanting to grow significantly, either by an increased product set, an increased demand load, or thinking about starting up those type of teams. So I really partner with them to make sure that a number of different areas really align with some of the things that we've been talking about, that we have value-based feature description. So whether that's analyzing the ways that people are talking about the features, developing what I would call a talk track. I definitely veer very far away from anything like a script, because I think that will always translate and someone will always be able to read through that. But having talking points that SEs can rely on that are stable. I also help to create demo experiences, whether those are videos that they can use to scale. And again, really coaching those teams to be able to drastically increase, or if they can't increase in headcount, strengthening the people that they do have to be able to be more successful. I think some of the things that we talked about, people might think, oh no, now we have to have longer demos. We need to have more demos because we have a lot more to talk about. And really, I think it's that we need less. We need to be able to be really effective with what we do so that you're not as busy. And also think about, the prospect doesn't want to have multiple meetings going through long, laborious. We need to be really effective when we are there. And so I'm excited, and I've really enjoyed helping software companies really be successful with what they have. I think it's probably the teacher in me. I was used to not having a large budget. And so I'm like, all right, what do we have and where do we want to go? So let's see what we can make happen to be successful with the things that we actually have.
That's great. And you, just so it's clear to anybody who may be listening or to the recording, you have experience with the Consensus platform, right? So, so presumably they could even reach out to you if they were just looking for help with Consensus.
Exactly. Yep. And even, Consensus specifically, when we launched that, we rolled out over 200 demo experiences in a single quarter that were all net new, because we were really strategic. What do we need to roll out? And so that's some of the things that I can help SaaS companies scale if they're wanting to build up a library of those things, but maybe don't have the headcount to be able to actually create all of that type of material.
Yeah. And presumably, particularly ed tech companies, because that's a space that you understand.
Yeah, totally. Exactly.
So, fabulous. Fabulous. Hannah, thank you so much for being here. You've been an absolute delight. I'm going to invite you to just hang around backstage just for a minute so we can part ways properly. Folks, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. I certainly have. If Hannah, safe to say that you would welcome people to connect with you on LinkedIn.
Oh, of course. Please do.
Excellent. Excellent. Folks, if this is your first time catching Tech Sales Advice, if you want to follow or get notified, I invite you to follow Tech Sales Advice on LinkedIn. You can always go to techsalesmastery.com to learn more about the work that we do. And of course, connect with Hannah and check out her new consulting company. Hannah, thank you so much for being here. Folks, I'll be back next week with another edition of Tech Sales Advice. Have a good week, all.
Have a great day.